Good evening, everyone. Welcome back, viewers. We just had a short break from 20 minutes, and now we would like to invite you to attend a keynote talk that is delivered by our guest speaker, Dr. Chan Naseeb. Dr. Naseeb holds a doctorate in data science from Eindhoven University of Technology. He is currently an AI and data science technical leader as well as an academic ambassador at IBM. He's helping clients across the industries to transform and realize their digital transformation agenda through modern technologies. He has many years of professional experience in the fields of design, implementation, and deployment of AI and machine learning solutions across several disciplines. He is internationally experienced, a technology executive who is passionate about trustworthy AI, responsible computing, and sharing his knowledge and expertise in making our world better and safer for everyone. Good evening, Dr. Chan Naseeb.
Good evening. Thank you for your kind introduction.
You're welcome. Are you all ready and set up to go?
Yes. So, did you give me the control to share?
Yes. I think you can see your screen.
Okay. So you are seeing the responsible computing slide, right?
Yes. Yes, we're seeing.
Okay. Cool.
Perfect. The stage is all yours.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. You have my video on? Or not yet? Just a quick check. Yeah. Okay. So hello. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, in case you're attending from different places around the world. So as my esteemed colleague or host introduced me, I will be talking about responsible computing today, and especially how we can take a step from trustworthy AI to responsible computing, right? Trustworthy AI is a topic of increasing interest, but like many other emerging topics, not everyone has the same understanding of what it means. And in this talk, we would like to discuss that and how we can take it from principle to practice and what businesses can do with it today. So we will try to understand the ethics differences between machines and humans and take this concept of trustworthy AI and expand it to IT and broader computing world, right? Considering their impact in different dimensions and related strategies, what we can do about them, which we call responsible computing. So we will focus on how we can become a responsible computing user or provider and how we can restore trust in IT. So the first thing that comes to mind is, why do we need ethics in AI, right? Cognitive systems, AI systems can reason over broad and deep data. They can form hypotheses and judgments. Most importantly, these systems are not simply programmed, right? They learn from their own experiences, their interactions with humans, and the outcomes of their judgments, right? Machine learning systems are not like typical programming code that we write, like if we need to achieve something, we write a function for it and then we can use it, right? It's more kind of learning from the data, and we don't provide the rules. We provide the input and output to the machine learning system, and that then it, by working on the data, the input data, it infers the rules, right? On which it then bases to do the prediction. So it's considering all these aspects, this paradigm shift for machine learning, it is both pragmatic and wise to establish principles to guide what we develop and bring to the world and how we do it. So historical examples are often helpful, right? Let's take a look at the food industry until the late 1960s. There was very little information about what went into the food that we bought. In an era where most food was prepared at home, it wasn't really a concern for people, right? Because everybody was using common ingredients. And it was a time when there was not much of a need for that type of information. As food production began to evolve and artificial additives became more and more prevalent, 1969 marked the year when White House conference recommended that the Food and Drug Administration Authority must develop an approach for understanding the ingredients and nutrition of the food, like what goes into it, right? And interesting thing is, like, it then took them like 20 years until 1990 when the Food and Drug Administration Authority published rules mandating nutrition labels on the packaged food. So think about it in this way. There was stasis, a new era developed when there was a recognition of a need for transparency. Like, we want to know what is in a food package, right? What are the ingredients? And then it took us like about 20 years to get the safeguards in place. Now, if you consider AI and how computing is advancing today, right? The pace that AI is being adopted, we don't have that much time. We don't have those 20 years to figure out what's the best way for companies to manage AI and computing system, because we are at an impending event where AI is either going to be immensely helpful or it could be problematic, much like our analogy, packaged food. It could be either very good for us as a society or very bad, depending on what goes into it. So there is a right way to implement AI and computing systems, and this is what we will be talking about today. So I hope with this food packaged example, you got the idea of why we really need to understand AI and what goes into it, and why it is really important. So, of course, there is more to come in the coming slides. So, as you know, software, AI is, again, just software, right? Software is the lingua franca of the business. It is how all communication is going to occur. It's how all commerce and trade is going to occur. And software is the accelerator. It's basically transforming the business models. And what we saw in that the global pandemic challenged all of us to become more resilient, and companies tried to use more and more software to accelerate and change how they do things, like customer service, just to name one. So here is the real question about software. Can you use it to anticipate and respond quickly to a change? Can you understand all of your data? Can you collect your data, organize your data? Can you analyze your data? And do you have real-time intelligence? Can you infuse it into your business processes? Can you use it to basically transform your business models? Because it starts with the data, right? So AI is only as good as the data that you put into it. Then it comes down to what is the intelligence of your AI, and is it able to drive meaningful outcomes? While the idea of AI has been around for decades, right, it wasn't until 10 years ago that the race to utilize AI became really serious. In those 10 years, AI has spread across all industries, becoming embedded in everyday business. Consider the financial services, employment, admission to colleges, universities, in the healthcare, transforming the enterprise workflows, business operations, pretty much all around, right? In fact, 3 and 4 businesses are exploring or implementing AI, and 78% of senior business decision makers say it is very or critically important that they can trust that their AI's output is fair, safe, and reliable. Millions of dollars are going into development of AI applications and solutions to help enhance decision making, right? To reduce costs, to save money, to optimize business operations, and to drive revenue by delighting customers, by serving them better with the help of AI. While artificial intelligence has made great strides over the past 10 years, from helping us to pick the next movie we watch to making possible driverless cars, we have also come to find out that if companies miss the mark on AI ethics, right? What are the governing rules or values, if you like, when developing and deploying AI solutions? They expose themselves to reputational, regulatory, and even legal risks. It could also mean wasting hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars in development and deployment resources and pushing timelines out even further. So now you might be wondering, like, okay, why we are discussing all those kind of things. And in your Makeathon, I think you're most likely developers, the entrepreneurs, idea people, solution architects, you name it, right? So I think the message that I'm trying to convey, and starting with trustworthy AI, and then I will slowly move into responsible computing. The key message for you is like how we can start raising awareness for ourselves and for others around these topics. And when we are developing solutions, systems, software, then we become conscious about the choices that we are making and what is the impact those choices will have. So now the question is like why, and this notion of AI ethics is becoming a hot point. The reason lies in nature of AI, and as I briefly mentioned earlier, in the past, computers would only do what they were programmed, what they were told to do, right? With AI, these machines no longer need explicit instructions to perform. Now they can learn and take their own decisions based on their learning. And that is the fundamental change in the way computers have always worked. And this is why we need AI ethics and why it needs to be a fundamental part of the adaptation or application of AI or even the solution design, right? So we need to be advancing AI ethics beyond compliance. It's not, okay, we set a few governance or compliance rules and then we say, okay, our system works very well with that. We really have to make the AI ethics, because the systems can learn on their own, then we need to make sure that they are not including the bias in their training or in their decision making, right? And we need to ensure that they are making the fair choices when they are operating to augment human intelligence, or even if they are kind of working in autonomous way. So there are basically 5 focus areas of AI ethics, and they are explainability, right? Can your AI system provide an human interpretable explanation for its predictions and decisions or insights that it came up with? Can the AI system treat individuals or different groups of individuals in an equitable way? So that, of course, the fairness depends in a context in which the system is being used, but we need to ensure that it is treating individuals or different groups of individuals in an equitable way. Can the system handle exceptional conditions, any abnormalities in the inputs effectively? Is it robust enough? And fourth is about the AI system need not to be a kind of black box. It really has to be able to explain or share the information that how it has been designed and developed. What are the internal components of it? What are the different parameters being used? What are the KPIs? So it need not be any more a black box, right? And then does it really respect the privacy and data rights of the consumers? So these are the key focus areas of trustworthy AI. So now, considering all these background around ethics, trustworthy AI, what if I posed you this challenge and ask you that if you are in this situation, that you are driving this trolley, right? And you're asked to make a choice in which on one track you have 5 people laying down, and on the other track you have 1 person lying down. So what would you do here? And your option or your task, you're asked to basically pick one of the track and keep driving. Of course, it's a difficult question, right? So you don't want to kill 5 people by driving, continuing your driving on one track, and on the other hand, even you don't want to kill 1 person on that track. So this is just to think about at a bigger level, what would be our choices, what would be the impact of the choices when we are developing the situation. Consider this 1 person, even let's say you say, okay, let's try with moving to this track because at least we are saving 5 people on the other track, right? But what if it was somebody that you knew, or it was a dear friend of you, right? Or a close relative, perhaps. So these are difficult questions. And of course, I think you all would say that I personally don't want to be in such a situation. And I'm sure you must have heard about this incident that took place a couple of years ago. Because of that, in December 2020, Uber sold its autonomous vehicle business to a startup for $4 billion, for which Uber itself had invested $1 billion, right, in self-driving vehicles. And it is likely that one contributing factor was death of Elaine Herzberg in 2018. And she was killed by this self-driving Uber vehicle while walking her bike across the street in Tempe, Arizona. So now, if you were in such a situation, who would you hold accountable? And this is a difficult question. Even there was a survey that took place, I think it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Stack Overflow, and the developers were asked the same question, like, okay, if your AI model does something wrong, who would you blame? And the 50% of developers, that's us, right? Most of us. So we said, those developers said, we should blame the data scientist or a machine learning engineer who built the model. But the question or the point that I'm trying to raise here is is that fair? So let's assume what happens if you as a data scientist built a model, and then after a couple of years passed by, you went on, you moved to a different company, things change in your life or whatever was the situation. But anyway, you went away from that company, and now the business dynamics change, and now there is a data drift. So which at that point, when you built the model, you did not have access to, or you perhaps didn't had any clue about that data. So now saying that, okay, we can help that data scientist accountable is not fair, because now you have new data and suddenly model starts to behave in a very strange way. And this is something happen in real life. In this case, what National Transportation Safety Board did is that they split the blame between the Uber, the safety driver, the victim, and state of Arizona. And this is the question, and that's why I'm trying to highlight and repeat it again and again, that we need to be conscious of these kind of aspects when we are building the models, when we are building the software, right? When we are developing the software, when we are making architectural choices. So enough on trustworthy AI, issues related to it, ethics. So now let's take a step further in the direction of responsible computing. So we at IBM, historically, we are known for really pursuing the highest standard of corporate responsibility in all what we do. And these are some of the statistics, right? And even I believe yesterday it was announced that IBM released a software package. It's called Environmental Intelligence Suite. So as you know, most of the challenges that we are facing today, they are related to climate change and global warming and these kind of issues. So IBM released this software suite, which you can use, which companies can use to, really start building their application, intelligent application to the next level. So they can use this as a baseline and then continue building on. So this strong heritage from IBM in sustainability and environmental initiatives, we are committed to further drive and lead in technology for good and make it human-centric, right? And human-centric technology which serves the human at its best. So we have taken time since a couple of years ago to have a close interaction with different clients and interview their CIOs, CTOs across different industries, and mainly in the European region, but also in some cases other regions, capturing their thinkings and thoughts. And here is what we came up with. The key point is, like, we need to start thinking differently about technology. So although we started our initiative, this is an IBM Academy of Technology initiative where like different IBMers contribute different ideas and they develop a point of view or even assets, software, frameworks, and different things like that, right? The technological thought pieces, masterpieces, whatever you want to call them. So we started this initiative at IBM back in early 2020 before the pandemic. And what we saw that the last 18 months have shown a clear acceleration towards digitization and technology. And some even say that this past years has brought as much as digital transformation to organization and people that would have taken traditionally 10 years. So overall, there is a clear understanding that we need to start thinking differently about the technology. And in that respect, if you have a look at the model that was published by the Brussels-based Foundation for Future Generations, they propose this 4P model, which is describing quite well the challenges and the purpose. So first P for people, planet, prosperity, and participation. So those are 4 Ps, right? Which they propose. So people and planet, they sound quite obvious, but not necessarily easy to do. Prosperity also includes the aspect of human centricity and not only the monetary side, right? Societal aspects and social behavior is important. So lastly, participation, addressing organizations, but also people. Each and every one of us, we need to get aware, get engaged, and start contributing. On the other side, this also addresses the point that most of the challenges we face today that are ahead of us will not be able to be solved by one person or organization. It is clearly where collaboration beyond existing partnerships is required. So when we relate this now to responsible computing, the framework that we came up with, it becomes very clear that IBM has, although a thought leadership position in that, but it is not an IBM only subject, but rather something that touches all industries and organizations around the globe and people, right? So very early in our thinking process, what we did is we tried to reach out to external organizations to validate our thinking, collect their feedback, reactions, test their interest to get them engaged together. And that is the framework that I'm going to talk about now. So what is responsible computing and how does it relate to all of us? So let's start digging deep into the responsible computing. So while working with IBMers, more than 100 IBMers, contributors, diverse group of people, broad set of countries around the globe, regions and cultures, we put the thinking of CIOs and CTOs that we interviewed in a comprehensive framework that we call responsible computing framework. So we did not only define the framework, but also validated it with a set of organizations we approached early on in the process, and they are also keen to contribute. So for example, just to give you a few examples, a large financial services group, a large telco operator, an energy company, they are part of this, what we call responsible computing council. And it is growing since then with different consultancy organizations joining and academic partnerships. And in this process, basically, we are trying to set up a neutrally hosted initiative to make it even more open for others to join and collaborate, to contribute towards a cross-industry shaping of KPIs, assessments, and methods. So let's walk through the framework. What are its 6 key domains that are foundation of the framework? And these domains have been grouped in 2 areas. So right-hand side are those with a more technology focus. And of course, they are not like mutually exclusive, right? So that doesn't mean they don't have a social focus, but they are like more focused on technology and some parts from the social, right? And left-hand side are the ones that are more towards the societal and social aspects. So on the top right, you see responsible data center. It was initially named as like use of natural resources, but then we rebranded earlier on in the process to data center, as that was the focus area. So for example, if we talk about the data center, a responsible data center, what we are talking here is like, okay, how we can reduce the power consumption, how we can understand overall environmental impact, like required amount of water needed for cooling the data center, cross-sector fertilization, using heat for heat networks, intelligent placement of load in the data center, kind of following the sun principle of load in the data center, and considering in that regard, maybe hybrid cloud technology and other things. If you go move to the next one, responsible infrastructure, in that we are proposing like, okay, let's look at the materials which are used for infrastructure, how environment friendly they are, power consumption of the infrastructure, looking at the IT economics benchmarks and work. Sorry, and then circularity aspects, like is the infrastructure using recycled materials to build it, waste reduction for packaging, new end of life scenarios, new infrastructure and compute capabilities. So for example, quantum, neuromorphic computing, low power consumption, specialized systems, keeping them close to where the data is generated, right? More kind of edge computing. And then we move on to responsible computing code. I believe this must be really interesting for all of you, right? Those participating in this Makeathon. And with this, we really want the developers, all of us, to be aware of like, okay, what are the design choices that we are making? What are the principles that we are following? How we are, what kind of guidance we have for the architecture, right? Also considering the AI side of AI model selection, new technologies, all those kind of aspects. So more details will come later. This is just to introduce you at the high level. And then we move on to the left side, which is like data usage. or data insights initially what we call, but data usage seems more kind of covering pretty much everything. Consider aspects like data privacy, regulations like GDPR or California Privacy Act, but broad collection of diverse regulations across the various countries and regions. They all come under this umbrella, right? So if you are working in a global organization, then you need to be considerate around those aspects. Data democratization, making data accessible for employees. Data fabric could be a core component to make that happen, right? Then we move on to responsible systems, where AI ethics is part of that, but going beyond AI, considering aspects like inclusion, diversity. So how we are kind of keeping everybody included, what is the impact of the systems that we are using or developing on the environment and people's life. And then the last one, responsible impact. So how we are creating the impact for our future generations. Like, for example, one of the recent, it's kind of recurring theme, but one of the recent example is like IBM every year initiates this call for code challenges, in which we work on several climate related challenges, and people like you participate throughout the world in those challenges. So as the framework is a holistic perspective, it brings the various domains and themes in the context they need to be discussing. Existing other individual approaches, because you might be asking, like, every company is doing this, ESG or sustainability, SDG goals, right? But those are typically addressing only one aspect, and therefore they are missing important points. So therefore we came up with this approach, which gives you pathways and provide easy entry points from various angles and perspective, in addition to the framework. So now talking about the pathways, what are the pathways towards achieving or towards going to achieve responsible computing, right? So there are three different pathways that have been defined. The first one is the framework that we just covered briefly, right? And then there are cross-cutting themes. As I briefly mentioned, there are a couple of themes that are currently all around in daily news. They include sustainability, inclusion, climate, privacy, security, circularity, diversity. So these can all be seen as individual entry points towards the responsible computing, right? And these are the cross-cutting themes. They typically have a strong footprint in one of the six framework domains. So typically they have more focus in one, but it doesn't mean that they are not to some extent present in the other domains. So like, for example, ethics is present in the responsible computing systems, but definitely also have a link to one or more other domains. That's also part of the reason for having the framework as a hexagon of hexagons. And third pathway is the target audience pathway. It puts the individual role into focus and shares a message for that person. So primary focus is certainly on IT managers, but also developers, and not to forget CFOs, CEOs, CTOs, CSRs, right? They also have interest in the subject. So what this framework does is it helping organization to focus on changes in the computing landscape and highlights the interconnections through these six key domains that provide guidance on KPIs and pathways to become a responsible computing provider. And each of those, I mean, we briefly discussed, so I'm not gonna spend too much time on that. Basically, the idea is like what is the impact of our data center how we are using the data, what is the impact, how we are creating the system, how we are using the infrastructure, how we are writing the code. Are we considerate about the design choices or impact that they will have on the end users? And I believe you would agree that typically we don't have that, at least historically, we don't have that focus because we are in a rush to, like the release cycles, or let's bring it to the market. And also historically, I mean, at least as far as I know, it's not part of the education that the developers get. So these are the key values for responsible computing, or what we call the manifesto of responsible computing, that the technologies and innovations should be such that they are driving positive impact for the society at large. The systems have to be inclusive, addressing bias or any discrimination, driving equality for all. Data should be used in a secure way, driving transparency, fairness, and respect for the user. And when writing code, we need to make conscious code choices which optimize environmental, social, and economical impact over time. And similarly, we talk about the systems or technology efficient. We should be using it in an efficient way, the available and future or forthcoming technologies. And data centers should be designed and operated with an emphasis on sustainability. So of course there are certain more, let's say, practical things which can be done. So this is one example of doing the maturity assessment for your organization, like how we are doing in terms of governance and other aspects, ethics, and you can get status on, like, okay, where we stand today, and then identify the areas what you need to do moving forward. So I think the key message that I want to give here is I will briefly discuss each of those 6 domains with a little bit focus on some of the steps to just to give you more idea on what are the things that you could take for yourself, right, as a takeaway, and how they fit into the overall picture. So it's a holistic approach. So responsible computing is a holistic approach to face and address the modern challenges. And the idea, this is to co-create, right, with our clients through establishment of the council, which kind of validates. And there are, as I mentioned already, few companies which are already part of this responsible computing council. And if you look at those challenges on the left side, sustainability and climate-related changes, having the importance of secure and reliable computing, data security breaches, social media tools used for toxic or misleading purposes. So we really need to consider all these aspects together. And this framework kind of helps you to integrate aspects of sustainability, ethics, openness, privacy, diversity, inclusion, climate, and circularity. And we are shaping, with this framework, we are shaping ways to restore trust in IT by developing, in the first step, this understanding that we need to be developing and applying technology in a responsible way, and sharing our experiences with others so that they can also help in this theme to drive more responsible computing and the impact that it has on our world. So there are, as you're aware, many individual initiatives, but this kind of connects them all together, putting more focus on, like, okay, what are the KPIs and how you can measure it. And that's why we say that we all need to work together. We all, as organization, as individual, need to be aware so that we can address these challenges that we are facing or that we have to face in the future. So from the data center perspective, as you can see, like, are there materials that we can use and reuse? What is the carbon footprint of the data center? Energy consumption, and these are the parameters which you can use to decide on, okay, what would be the ideal location for my data center? And you need to have kind of accurate measurements when you need to refresh the technology. Are you using renewable energy sources for your data center? What are the cooling consideration depending on the location of your data center? Similarly, distribution of UPS service, how you organize your racks, focusing on reducing the environmental impact for financial and environmental benefits. And then here on the right side, you have like, what are the steps that you could do? You need to have this strategy, moving to a more renewable energy sources, monitoring consumption and carbon footprint. So of course there are like more detailed steps, but I'm just introducing you to the high level. And then there are like KPIs and a maturity assessment for each of those domains. Through an ESG, environmental, social, and governance prism, the responsible computing infrastructure takes into account various aspects, such as what is the durability of the materials? Can you recycle them? What is the waste that they produce? Are you considering the standardization and quantification? So we need to stop neglecting the infrastructure domain, right? The breadth and depth of infrastructure in the context of IT is huge. So we need to consider like, okay, what are the current infrastructure components that you're using? How are you consolidating your workloads? Are you running high utilization, all your resources or not? If not, then you need to consider, okay, how we can make it more optimal and how we can use these strategies to reduce waste and consumption, promote more consolidated use of resources, and have a rationalization prevailing across the infrastructure to enable individual and companies to have more positive impact. So then on the right, you have a number of steps like, okay, how we can establish a baseline measurement on CO2 footprint for the infrastructure. Then we can improve the reporting based on experiences from establishing the baseline. And at the same time, requesting each IT infrastructure vendor provider to give information around their reports on energy usage, product life cycle, CO2 emissions, everything. So then you're making yourself and your teams aware of the impact for the computing resources, infrastructure resources that they are using. And maybe you can find, most likely you can find some room to improve there. Similarly, like code, the third part, third key domain, I think this is really important for all of you, right? Especially when we are talking about this Makeathon or otherwise when we are developing solutions, because we might not be directly involved in the data center or infrastructure, although we are to some extent, but I think most of us are really involved in the code part. And that's where we need to be aware when writing code. Of course, it might sound very contrary to what we are used to, but I think this is really important because writing responsible code means being aware of, okay, when I'm writing this algorithm, what would be the potential implications on the environment, society, economical impact of all the choices that I'm making, and how I can minimize their negative impact. Trustworthy AI, ethical AI, the example of self-driving vehicles, or like whom to hold accountable, whom to hold accountable, are some of the examples that come under this domain. How we can reduce the data usage and improve cybersecurity, promoting better accessibility and reducing the digital divide. And there are, I mean, number of topics that we can talk around code. Right? If we are the developers and architects, we hold a big influence on when it comes to making these technology architecture choices, tools choices, Python, programming languages, and things like that. End users, we need to really make them aware of the impact and energy consumption of the technology they use. Similarly, product owners and designers, they are the one who make design choices that help with accessibility, energy consumption, and economic sustainability of the application. Data usage. So here on the right, you can see one example of the framework that we came up with for this domain of data usage, like how you can involve different stakeholders and what are the KPIs, what is their role from those different stakeholders, and how you can achieve different KPIs like data privacy, data governance, IT governance. It might not be all very well readable, but this is just to show you an example, like how you can use this approach to access their data usage, your data usage behavior, and through collaborative effort between different business units. It is basically centered around the duty to deal with and have control over data, its life cycle, as well as being accountable for efficient and effective use of the data. So I will quickly skim through last two domains looking at the time. But I think you got the idea. When we are talking about the systems, we need to consider this three-layered approach, which is culture, how we can enforce the responsibility by design. Looking at the technology aspects, can we use the forensic technology that can monitor, collect, detect issues, or enable trust and governance standards, right, through which we can measure and have or achieve a compliance. So this is how we can have an approach towards responsible systems. And there on the right, you see like, okay, what are the different key stakeholders and what are the actions that they need to have. So for example, CTOs, CIOs, they need to maintain integrity of internal systems, achieve compliance. Similarly, system consumers have the responsibility that the systems, they expect that systems be fair, ethical, and not cause bias towards them or harm the people or the environment. And then you have the government, which need to regulate to ensure companies develop and use responsible systems. So last aspect or last key domain is the impact. When we recommend the three foundational assessment criteria for an organization, for any company to assess the responsible impact of their programs or initiatives that they are running, they need to consider the culture aspect. So how to educate, consider the diversity, include everyone, consider the morals, values, ethics, and mindset of the team. And considering the impact, look at clearly defining the vision for the project, tying it together with the United Nations SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and ensuring that the negative outcomes are understood and then mitigated, and you can measure the impact, whether it's in terms of economic or CO2 emissions, carbon footprint, whatever that might be. You need to be able to understand find that out, mitigate it, and make it measurable. Okay, what would be the impact of that? And then work with the governance standards. Last but not least, considering these aspects, we have these priorities for social advancement, considering all the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Considering that, you need to start with the goal setting as an organization. Like, okay, this is our goal. For example, if you are an enterprise which is running a data center, right? And then you say, okay, I want to be able to, by next year, you as a business unit leader or executive decide, okay, I want to be able to make our data center more responsible, that I am not harming the environment. I'm using the resources which are which could be recycled, which are reusable, and things like that. And I would try to minimize the impact on the environment and considering other UN SDGs. Similarly, if you are a developer, a programmer, you want to consider, okay, goal for me is to basically write the code which is bias free, which is not putting discrimination or anything, or not creating adverse impact on the end users, right? So these are the things that you start with the goal setting mindset, and then you translate or connect it with the United Nations SDGs. Then you try to come up with the KPIs through which you can measure the impact or how you are making progress towards your goal. And then you come up with a business model or strategy, and then you try to replicate it within your organization and scale it. So this is how we propose to basically create the impact and scale it across the organization by using this framework. So just to conclude briefly, I hope you got the key message that trust in AI is really important, right? And if we look at the broader picture, computing system, looking back at the pandemic, what kind of changes it made us consider, and looking the impact on the environment or the challenges that we are facing today, we really need to have such an approach through which we kind of connect all bits and pieces together and act more responsibility. If we are programmers, we should be writing, first getting this education, getting this understanding, building this understanding, sharing it with others, and then it is our responsibility to write such a code which is not creating adverse impact or not having discrimination on others. Similarly for all other dimensions. So as my esteemed opponent introduced me, I think our goal, apart from our jobs or daily work, should be that how we can act in a responsible way and how we can make our world better for us, for all of us, and for our next coming generations. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Dr. Naseeb. That has been the business talk on topic responsible computing. Right now, we will move to a Q&A session. So attendees, please make sure to write all the questions in channel number 2, workshops and talks. And while we wait for some questions, I have one question. You have talked about ethics in AI, and we have seen currently that the European Union has rolled out some guidelines, some rules when dealing with AI and incorporating systems and having systems that incorporate AI. And do you think it's a challenge to keep up with all the new trends that are within the field of AI? Because we can see that each month, each year, we get some new trends, some new technologies that should definitely have some rules, like guidelines regarding ethics.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very interesting question. So And you might have noticed, like I repeated this point in my talk a couple of times, that there are many initiatives, many rules or guidance or frameworks, whatever you call, but they are kind of working in considering one aspect. So rules are good, compliance, regulations, they're all good, but I think they are still made with, let's say, kind of limited view on in one way or the other, because when we are human, right, we are making regulations, we don't see what will happen in few years with the technology, or for example, when quantum and neuromorphic computing becomes prevalent, right, we will have yet new challenges, or we would need to rewrite our rules. So definitely it is a challenge, but I think what we can do is how we can train ourselves or educate. So if we can all played our role in educating, and what we learn through these kind of sessions or whatever ways, like you said, okay, we need to be cautious and be aware about these kind of guidelines, rules, which is coming from European Union or the governments or other individuals, or even the market players, technology leaders. We need to discuss, talk about them, and develop this shared understanding, I think, because this would be really helpful in propagating the message forward and making those things a reality. So I think it's more of a kind of, let's say, our developers and um, business people, or the next generation, or even this generation's responsibility to keep these things forward and keep these kind of moving into the work process, not just like as a talks or written documents. So I hope that answers your question.
I think you have covered it perfectly. Let me just check if there are some questions in the channel. We haven't received any questions so far, so perhaps we can wait a minute or two.
Sure.
Is there anything else that you would like to add before?
Yeah, so I think I can add one thing. Maybe I said it briefly earlier as well. So let's see, when your teams are throughout this Makeathon, when they are writing code, at least they can think about some of the points. I'm not saying that they need to implement, but at least they could come up with some of the ideas that they came and to notice when they were working. Okay, there could be a potential, let's say, point for improvement in terms of removing the bias, or doing some other kind of aspects which need to be addressed at some point if we want to deploy this system or deploy this solution. And then we need to consider these aspects. So I think that would be really something like as a takeaway or lesson learned, which they can later on reflect. Okay, this is what we heard in the talk, and this is how we can relate to it.
Yes, that sounds amazing. I think we can share the hexagon of hexagons to the channels, so they
Yeah,
can get inspired.
absolutely.
That is definitely an important topic. And in fact, we have our own track, sustainability, in the competition, and we are actually quite excited to see what comes out of the teams. Okay, I don't think we have received any questions so far, and we have reached the end of the final deep dive day. Thank you very much, Dr. Chan Naseeb. It was a pleasure having you. The talk was amazing. We will definitely reshare all the necessary information so the participants can get more inspired and they can work it on, they can make it more responsible. And again, thank you very much. This has been Dr. Chan Naseeb. I'm your host, Petar Petrov. And make sure to tune in tomorrow at 10 a.m. for the official opening ceremony of the Makeathon weekend. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you for having me. Have a good evening. Bye.